Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club Financial Edition, and today we're continuing our reading of Gold Warriors by Sterling and Peggy Seagrave. And the subtitle is called America's Secret Recovery of Yamashita's Gold. So, this particular book was inspired by, I guess you could call it current events, especially in the precious metal area. And I thought it would be interesting to read about a part of its history, in this case, gold, um, and see what it's all about. So that's the inspiration, anyways, for this particular book. But before we begin, I want to thank you for being here. If you like what we do here, please do consider checking out our other book clubs. We have our spiritual book clubs on Mondays and health book clubs on Wednesdays. And we put all the books that we've read in the past as well as the present on YouTube. So we have it on a playlist. So you guys can just download it and listen to it when you're jogging or walking your dog or stuck in traffic or whatever. So please do consider subscribing and liking and commenting and all that good stuff on YouTube. We have other contents on there as well, not just the book clubs. If you have a book or books that you would like to recommend for us to read, it could be a spiritual book, a financial book, a health book. We'd love to hear from you. I will leave a link in the description box below, and we would love to consider it. Also, please consider signing up for our free monthly newsletter as well. And if you want to support us further, you can buy me a coffee, leave a donation, check out our merch. We always have different designs, new designs, and updating old designs. And we have merch for your fur babies, for your cats and dogs, as well as for humans. So please do come back often and check them out. And you can support us that way. And lastly, if you are in the Los Angeles area or visiting LA, come visit us in our healing center. We have a healing center that we use technologies based on Nikola Tesla's scalar wave research for holistic healing for both domestic cats and dogs as well as humans. So you can read all about that on our website, read about how the technology works and all the benefits it provides and all that stuff, as well as our other services that we provide as well. So please do come check them all out. And we thank you for supporting us in whatever way, shape, or form that you can. And most importantly, thank you for being on this journey with us. We love to read, and I think reading is a lost art. So kudos to you guys for sticking to it, sticking with us, I should say. Okay, so this is chapter 4, and this will be part 2. Now, the book has a lot of endnotes at the end of the chapter. So, what I'll do is I'll read like a page or so, and then I'll read some of the endnotes in the back. So, that's the format that we're going to follow. And I hope you're enjoying this book so far. And the author has other books as well that they've written. So, if you like this book, you could consider checking out their other books also. All right, let's see here. Where did we leave off? Okay, all right, here we go. As Hong Kong was occupied, homes, hotels, businesses, real estate, artworks, and antiques were confiscated from wealthy Chinese families, given military scrip or bank scrip in exchange. Half a century later, these families still are pursuing legal action in an attempt to force Japan to redeem millions of dollars worth of scrip. Farcically, the Japanese claim the scrip was issued by a former government, so the current government has no responsibility to honor it. Many of Hong Kong's finest art collections remain in private Japanese hands, paid for with, quote, monopoly money. Rickshaw pullers also were paid in scrip. If they did not express gratitude, they were beheaded. POWs, when paid at all, were paid in scrip, then had monthly withholding taken out that would be returned, quote, when they were sent home, end quote. There was even a luxury tax. Cat owners had to pay the equivalent of $300 US a month for the privilege of having tires on their cats. Oh, I'm sorry. I read that wrong. I don't know why I said cats. It's car owners. Ah, that is very funny, Christina. Okay, it's car owners, not cat owners. Okay. All right. I feel relieved now that the cats were taxed. Okay. So car owners had to pay the equivalent of $300 US a month for the privilege of having tires on their cars. All right. Joseph Grew, the U.S. ambassador in Tokyo from 1932 until he was repatriated in 1942, said, quote, even the Japanese militarists could not continue indefinitely a program of outright larcenies and burglaries. The robbery is reduced to a system. They have made that system resemble finance. Like our finance, it deals with money. Like ours, it uses the familiar terms of cash, credit, loans, stock companies, government subsidies, traffic, taxes, and so on. There, the resemblance ceases. Once new territory was acquired, the Japanese invaders built up a currency system that rested on the fiat of the Japanese army and issued banknotes payable only in death to anyone who did not honor them. With this currency, the Japanese military manipulated exchange so as to conduct trade on a ruthlessly unfair basis. They supplemented this with outright confiscation or capital levies, or simply with the murder of the property owners and the enslavement of the workers. Japanese run monopolies fixed prices on what they wanted at ridiculously low levels, and Japanese military patrols bought at these prices. On this basis, Japan was able to develop a flourishing flow into Japan of goods until the occupied area was pumped dry. Then some concessions would be made in an attempt to prime the pump and sink it deeper into the well. End quote. Wow. Sounds very much like the current world that we live in, doesn't it? Nothing has changed very much. Okay, to squeeze more, Japan set up lotteries and gambling houses where players had to spend hard currency. Winners took home their jackpots in scrip. Periodically, Japanese sold rationed goods like rice, cigarettes, sugar, and salt at very high prices. Instead of making these goods available openly, they were channeled to local gangsters and black marketers who collaborated in return for narcotics. Ordinary people wanting to buy food, tobacco, salt, and medicine on the black market had to dig into secret caches of colonial hard currency, gold, or jewelry. When treasure was sorted by Golden Lily, the gold, platinum, gemstones, and artworks were created for shipment first to Manila. Confiscated stocks, bonds, gold bearer certificates were channeled to Yokohama Specie Bank or Bank of Taiwan for transfer to Japanese accounts at foreign banks in neutral countries. The single biggest shareholder of the Yokohama Specie Bank was Emperor Hirohito, owning 22%. Consequently, the Imperial Household Agency controlled the bank's shareholder meetings. By the end of the war, it has been established that Hirohito had over $100 million, $1 billion in today's terms, hidden in gold and foreign currency accounts in Switzerland, South America, Portugal, Spain, and the Vatican. Wow, that's incredible. All right, let's see what kind of endnote they have back there for us. Let's see what page that is. That is page 52, 51, 52. Okay. All right, so on page 51, the note about Japanese exercise automatic withholding of POW salaries, you can find that in OI. The Japanese Empire in the Tropics, Volume 2, page 347. The note about even Japanese militarists grew, quote, is from United Nations Information Office, Japan's Record and World Security. I think I just read page 51. Yeah, okay. I'm just checking here for a minute. The note about Japanese lotteries, see Oi and Kratoska. The note about Japanese selling ration goods to rake in foreign currency, see Akashi Watanabe. The note about Hirohito's share of Yokohama Specie Bank was reported by John Gunther inside Asia. Inside Asia, see also Seagrave, Yamato Dynasty. The note about Hirohito's assets at the end of the war, see Manning, Hirohito, the War Years. On August 14, on August 14, 2002, Japan Today reported the discovery of more than $3.5 billion in secret Japanese accounts in Switzerland. These were designated as, quote, special account number 1, end quote, and, quote, special account number 2, end quote. It helps explain why American official Edwin S. Pauley could say with a straight face at the end of the war that, quote, no Swiss accounts have been discovered in the name of the imperial family, end quote. See chapter 7. Wow. Special account number 1 and special account number 2. Very imaginative. Okay. But even I was just thinking out loud, even the account has to be connected to someone. Has to be someone because a person still has to authorize any withdrawal or go in person to get, deposit money or withdraw money or whatever transaction that they're doing. Interesting. Okay. I don't know how Swiss bank accounts work. So I'm not in that category, so I cannot make that comment. But I'm just thinking out loud in general. All right, so let's continue. Let me move the camera out just a little bit there. Nope, out. Okay. Okay, here we go. Near the end of the war, Yokohama Specie Bank discovered that it had not correctly balanced its books and owed a significant sum to banks in the conquered territories. The overdraft was cleared by paying those banks in worthless scrip. As the emperor continued to be the biggest shareholder after the war, the argument that management of the bank had changed is particularly absurd. Nazi Germany typically laundered looted gold and non-monetary gold by re-smelting it and casting it into bars that were hallmarked with Black Eagle swastikas, numbered in keeping with standard practice of the Reichsbank. This gold was moved to banks in Switzerland, Sweden, Portugal, or Argentina. Japan used the same techniques, moving gold through Swiss banks in Tokyo, Portuguese banks in Macau, and banks in Chile and Argentina. When gold was physically moved to those countries, it was carried by large cargo submarines. As the center of the world's unofficial gold trade, Macau was enriched. When the Allies got together at the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944 to put a stop to the laundering of Nazi and Japanese war loot through neutral countries, Portugal somehow forgot to include Macau on the list, and nobody drew attention to the oversight. And just a side note, Macau is known as the Las Vegas of the East. Okay, continue. As historian Bertil Lintner noted, quote, Macau merchants were soon buying gold at a premium. Sorry, missed a line there. Macau merchants were soon buying gold abroad at $35 an ounce from banks, shipping it back to the enclave and selling it at a premium to whoever wanted to buy it. The syndicate was led by Ho Yin, an overseas Chinese who had fled from Guangdong to sit out the war, end quote. Macau was a wartime haven for rich Chinese, overseas Chinese who enlarged their fortunes by precious metal trading. The only significant source of gold at the time was Japanese plunder. In the China Seas, only Japanese banks were open for business. Macau pawn shops, brokers, and private citizens made fortunes turning hard currencies into gold for the Japanese. At war's end, when colonial authorities returned, Macau's millionaires were able to use the colonial currency they had acquired to buy the most desirable land, buildings, and factories at knockdown prices. Some of Hirohito's personal wealth was laundered through Macau, the rest through Swiss banks in Tokyo. Journalist Paul Manning, who had a chance to review some of Hirohito's financial records at the end of the war, when they were in the custody of U.S. occupation authorities, saw that the emperor's personal assets began to be moved abroad to neutral havens at the end of 1943, preparing for the inevitable feat. Privy Seal Kiddo called a meeting of Japan's leading bankers, who were also the emperor's financial advisor. On their recommendation, funds were transferred from Tokyo to Switzerland, virtually emptying Hirohito's cash reserves in Tokyo. Nazi gold, which had been moved to the Swiss accounts of Yokohama Specie Bank to pay for purchases from Japan, were also were transferred to Hirohito's accounts in Switzerland. At the same time, Kiddo moved other imperial gold reserves to Argentina by sub and to Macau, where it was sold for hard currencies. And this money was then moved to Switzerland by bank transfer. Historian James McKay separately concluded that Hirohito had US $20 million in Swiss accounts, US $35 million in South American banks, and US $45 million in Portugal, Spain, and the Vatican. Because most of the stolen treasure reaching Japan made its way into private vaults and the vaults of the imperial family, Tokyo's strategy for the economic exploitation of Southeast Asia was a failure. It was also sabotaged by overseas Chinese, who controlled the region's raw materials, industries, agriculture, smuggling, and rackets. While they despised the Japanese for the rape of China, they hated them in particular for bombing Amoy, Swatow, and other harbors along the China coast that were the ancestral homes of their dialect groups. In the past, Western companies have been successful in Southeast Asia only when they found ways to work with the overseas Chinese. As Japan took over and tried to set up equivalent monopolies of oil, sugar, rice, salt, and other commodities, whole sectors of local economies collapsed. Prices shot up, the supply of goods came to a halt, and there was massive unemployment, famine, inflation, and hoarding. Wow. All right, let's see what 52, let's see what kind of endnotes we can read up. Okay, sorry about that. I'm just kind of reading through because we read a little bit of page 53. Okay. All right, let's see. Okay. So the note about how Macau, though through the oversight of Allied governments meeting at Bretton Woods, became the center of the world's unofficial gold trade during the Pacific War. See Bertil Lintner, Friends in Need, from Far Eastern Economic Review, December 30th, 1999, page 15. The secret Swiss accounts referred to in the above note were set up just after the Bretton Woods Conference. The note about Ho Yin's gold syndicate in Macau, you can find that in Lintner, Friends in Need. The note about Manning described how Hirohito's wealth moved to neutral safe havens. You can find that in Manning Hirohito, The Warriors, page 171 to 181. When money was collected to aid Allied POWs, it was placed in a special account at Swiss National Bank. The Japanese insisted on converting the Swiss francs into local military scrip currency and thereby realized a profit on the exchange of more than 3,200%. See Japan Today. Japan diverted Allied funds from secret accounts, August 14, 2002. The note about the Vatican was also active in laundering loot for the Nazis. See Vatican drawn into scandal over Nazi-era gold. CNN Interactive Edition, July 22nd, 1997. The note about Watanabe Wataru and his career in China. Akashi Watanabe. I don't know if we read that, but that's okay. 53. Okay. In retaliation, overseas Chinese became special targets. Experts in terror were sent to punish them. Colonel Watanabe Wataru spent 10 years in North China developing techniques such as kidnapping members of prosperous Chinese families, amputating body parts starting with ears, noses, and fingers, then continuing to breasts and testicles. He was especially effective when he threatened to castrate eldest sons. In this manner, Watanabe was credited with bringing in great quantities of gold, gemstones, and artworks. In China, he had headed one of the special service agencies, Tokumu Kikan, whose duties were espionage, counter-espionage, propaganda, and fifth column subversion. Watanabe was then given the job of terrorizing Malaya's overseas Chinese. His techniques were well known from speeches he made and papers he drafted. Quote, the Chinese are prone to maintain a false obedience, and they are as crafty as anything and hard to control. They ought to be dealt with unsparingly, end quote. To help, he enlisted cronies from his days in Manchuria. One was his old friend, Colonel Tsuchi Masanobu, a flamboyant leader of the Total War cult, who had helped plan the strike south and the Malaya campaign of General Yamashita. Another was Takashi Toru, who had served in China as an intelligence officer with Special Service Section 8 and was an expert in the Chinese problem. Watanabe described Takase as a complicated character, conceited, quarrelsome, aggressive, but his ruthlessness was exactly what was needed. Colonel Tsuchi was Japan's most ruthless special servant agent. Oh, a little cotton mouth there. Combining traits that made Gobos, Heydrich, and Skorzeny uniquely feared in the Nazi Party. Prior to the strike south, Imperial General Headquarters issued to officers a handbook written by Tsuchi, which makes repeated references to plundering the wealth of the treasure house of the Far East. The methods he recommended were based on terror. Compassion and sympathy were to be avoided. No longer could the overseas Chinese, quote, indulge themselves in a hedonistic and wasteful way of life, end quote. Japan would force them, quote, to account for their past mistakes and to make them ready to give up their lives and property, end quote. Tsuchi got everyone's attention with a horrific atrocity. By noon on February 21, 1942, all male Chinese on the island of Singapore between age 18 and 50 were assembled in 5 locations. Each walked past a row of hooded informers. When a hood nodded, that Chinese was condemned to death. His skin stamped with a triangular ink chop. Others were stamped with squares and released. A total of 70,699 Singapore Chinese were taken off for torture and killing. Mass executions lasted many days, with Suu Kyi watching closely. Most were shot, bayoneted, or beheaded, but 20,000 were roped together on barges and taken into the sea lanes of Singapore, where they were forced overboard. Those who did not drown quickly were machine gunned. This nightmare was called sukching, or ethnic cleansing. Suu Kyi then extended sukching to the whole Malay Peninsula, where another 40,000 were slain, including women, schoolchildren, and babies. Similar mass executions of Chinese happened everywhere. Happened elsewhere. Wow. He's going to have a lot of karma coming back to him. 100 folds. Okay. Let's see what page was that. 50, 53. Okay, so the note about, we read it already, but we'll read it again. The note about Watanabe Wataru and his career in China, Akashi Watanabe. The note about Takase Toru met Watanabe through Tsuchi Masanobu. Takase's expertise in overseas Chinese and his position as a special service agent, Imperial Headquarters, Intelligence 6, Section 8C Akashi. The note about Colonel Tsuchi, the treasure house of the Far East, you can find that in Tsuchi Greatest Victory, page 238. The note about terror and coercion as Watanabe's way of dealing with the Chinese, see Akashi. Interesting. Okay. All right, continue. Colonel Watanabe declared that Singapore Chinese must atone to Emperor Hirohito to the sum of 50 million yen as a gift on the emperor's birthday in April. This was equal to 1/4 of the total currency in circulation in Malaya at the time. Takase was to collect the contributions. Since nobody could produce that much cash on short notice, Takase arranged a loan of 22 million yen from the Yokohama Specie Bank, so the birthday present did not fall short. Chinese were required to repay the loan and interest with gold bullion, hard foreign currency, or other tangible assets. While Sumatra had its Royal Dutch Shell oil fields, Malaya was the greatest rubber producing region in the world. Using scrip, Watanabe brought all rubber stocks for shipment to Japan. He then ordered all rubber estates and processing facilities sold to Japan's Sabatsu conglomerates, again for scrip. The shock of this anti-Chinese reign of terror brought results for a few weeks, but ultimately backfired as the flow of rice, salt, and other commodities dwindled further. Watanabe offered special discounts and rebates to quislings and collaborators. A few mavericks wanted an abundant supply of narcotics, so Japan's major collaborators were drug dealers and gangsters. Just a side note, these people are pretty short-sighted from what I'm reading. You know, they loot and steal for their own short-sighted, uh, gain, but they just create a lot of problems in the long run. Well, okay, so just a little squirrel there. All right, continue. Only with slave labor was Japan not frustrated. There were three groups of victims: local people, overseas Chinese, and Westerners. Each was treated differently. By mid-1942, the Japanese held some 140,000 Allied POWs, about 500,000 Western civilians, and more than 1 million overseas Chinese internees. Though camp conditions for Western civilians were Spartan in the extreme, POWs were treated with barbaric cruelty. Many Allied servicemen were really civilians hastily drafted at the last moment. The father of Dutch journalist Jos Hagars was put to work with thousands of others building the Pekanbaru Railway in Sumatra. Although he survived the war, his health was broken and he eventually died in the Netherlands of his injuries. Others toiled 1,000 feet below ground, working naked in coal mines belonging to Mitsui and Mitsubishi. Local populations were treated as garbage. After the war, the government of Indonesia said 4 million of her people were pressed into slave labor battalions, carried away on slave ships, and worked to death in distant lands. Some 225,000 of them worked on the Kauai River Death Railway between Siam and Burma. When they died, their bodies were used as fill for railway embankments. In Malaya by 1944, all males between 15 and 40 not employed in vital jobs were dragooned into slave labor battalions. Korea maintained she lost 6 million as slave labor, many sent to Southeast Asia on slave ships. The number of Chinese slaves was bigger yet. Each year, Japan dragooned about 1 million Chinese and 1 million Koreans as slaves. Some were shipped to Japan because all Japanese miners had been drafted for military service. Kishi Nobusuke, former head of Manchuria and now Tojo's Minister of Mines and Industry, imported 750,000 slaves from Korea and 50,000 from China. Historian Stephen Roberts explains that as subjects of the Japanese Empire, Koreans were given preferential handling as slaves, while the Chinese, with no rights at all, were treated worse than draft animals. Another 50,000 from China and an unknown number from Taiwan were taken by slave ships to the Philippines, where most died. Eyewitnesses told us that thousands of Chinese and Taiwanese dug tunnels and treasure vaults for Golden Lily, then were buried alive when the vaults were sealed. As they were only fed rice gruel or seaweed soup, many starved to death on the job. Wow, that's pretty atrocious time in history. Okay, let's see here, page 50. Let me see what page that is. 54. Okay. All right, so the note about Suk-ching and Suchi's key role in the atrocity are well documented. C. McCoy, Southeast Asia under Japanese occupation. Also Goodman, Imperial Japan and Asia. Also Seagrave, Lords of the Rim, Chapter 10. And also Ward, the killer they called God. Suchi hosted a dinner party in Burma where the main course was the liver of a captured American pilot. Oh, wow. C. Seagrave, Lords, page 124. The note about Hirohito's birthday gift of 50 million yen and Takase's role. C. Akashi, McCoy, Southeast Asia under Japanese occupation. Seagrave, Lords of the Rim. The note about figure of 140,000 Allied POWs. You could find that in Dawes, Prisoners of the Japanese, page 17. The note about civilian internment camps as Spartan. You can find that in Wasserstein, Secret War, page 140. The note about North Korea claims Japan conscripted 6 million Koreans during the war. You could find that in Hicks, Comfort Women. The note about Kishi's use of nearly 1 million slave laborers. You could find that in Roberts, Mitsui, page 357 and 358. Kishi became Japan's prime minister in the 1950s with the help of Eisenhower, Nixon, and generous secret aid from the U.S. government. Indonesian slave laborers, who the Japanese call volunteers or conscript laborers, the Romusha, were buried in railway embankments. Hundreds of thousands of Romusha died or disappeared under the Japanese regime. You could find that in Dawes' Prisoners of the Japanese, page 211. Okay. All right, continuing. Japan's biggest corporations used slaves to work mines, to build roads, railways, airfields, and harbors. The biggest single employer of slaves was Mitsui, and many of the slave ships were Mitsui vessels. But records show that POWs also slaved for Kawasaki Heavy Industries, Mitsubishi, Nippon Steel, Showa Denko, and other corporations. Mitsubishi's market position at the war's end in 1945 was described by a Western economist as being equivalent to the merger of U.S. Steel, General Motors, Standard Oil, Alcoa, Douglas Aircraft, DuPont, Westinghouse, AT&T, National City Bank, Woolworth Stores, and Hilton Hotels. As for Mitsui, it boasted 1.8 million workers at home and abroad, and owned at least 356 major companies. Wow. Sounds a little bit like today's BlackRock and State. What is it? What's the other one? State Street or something? Okay. Today, these conglomerates deny any obligation to compensate those who survived on the argument that their management changed at the end of the war. So today's corporations are not the same. Strangely, their corporate banks escaped any punishment during the U.S. occupation. The death rate for Allied POWs held by the Japanese was nearly 30%, compared to 4% of those held by the Nazis. It would take thousands of pages to recount the brutalities they suffered. Japanese camp administrators and medical staff deliberately allowed POWs to suffer horrible deaths from the beriberi, a disease resulting from deficiency of vitamin B1. Author Gavin Dawes makes clear that camp doctors knew these men were dying because their diet of polished white rice was deficient in B1. Unpolished brown rice contains B1, but the vitamin is removed in the polishing process. Simply feeding prisoners cheaper brown unpolished rice would have cured the problem. At a POW camp in Hainan Island, Captain Kikuchi Ichiro withheld vitamin B tablets while calculating absolute minimum food needed to keep POWs barely alive. The men developed puffy chests, distended bellies, testicles like balloons. Fluid filled their lungs and they suffocated. Everyone knew the choking sound of men gagging to death from beriberi. Thousands of POWs were taken to Japan on hell ships, sealed in cargo holds. Conditions were so grim that of 1,500 prisoners, 100 to 200 were dead when they reached Japan. Ships carrying POWs were supposed to be marked a certain way to avoid being attacked. Japan did not mark its hell ships, so when they were attacked by Allied subs or aircraft, the ships went down with all prisoners sealed in the holds. Albert Kelder's research shows that submarines unwittingly torpedoed 16 hell ships crowded with British, Australian, American, and Dutch POWs, plus thousands of Indonesian coolies called Romushas. Kelder told us that a total of 17,036 men died when these 16 iron coffins went down. Most were mistakenly sunk by U.S. subs. 3 Papanito, Paddle, and Sea Lion 2 unintentionally set the offer record with 2,776 drowned POWs. Okay, let's read the endnotes here. I think we're 55, right? Yeah. All right, so the note about treated worse than draft animals, you can find that in Roberts. Mitsui, page 358. The note about Japanese, try that again. The note about Taiwanese slave laborers, Valmores said there were Taiwanese slaves as distinct from Chinese. Officially, Japan had no Taiwanese slave labor, but convicted criminals would have been an exception. The note about slave labor and zabatsu. In November 2000, one of Japan's largest or biggest construction companies, Kojima, agreed to pay $4.5 million in compensation to survivors and relatives of Chinese slaves who died at its Hanoika copper mine in northern Japan. Conditions there were so brutal that the slaves rose up in rebellion in June 1945. Um, the note about Allied POW death rates of 30% in Japanese camps compared to 4% in Nazi POW camps. You can find that in Dawes, Prisoners, page 360 to 361. And Russian POWs in Nazi camps fared far less well, however. The note about beriberi and intentional withholding of vitamins and food from POWs by the Japanese, you can find that in Singlob, Hazardous Duty, page 94, and Dawes Prisoners, page 121 to 122. Okay. All right. Continuing here. Chinese shipping lines were forced to lease ships to Japan for scrip. So kidnapped comfort women and slaves could be sent to Japan or to Southeast Asia. Investigators have found records establishing beyond question that the hell ships, slave ships, and fake hospital ships were operated by top Japanese corporations, including three of the world's biggest shipping lines, their predecessors, or companies that merged with them during or after the war. Among them is NYK Line, Nippon Yusen Kabushiki, the successor to Tokyo Yusen Kabushiki, which acquired one of the slave ship operators, Chosen Yusen Kabushiki. Another is KKK Line. Huh, interesting name. That is Kisan Kabushiki Kaisha, part of the Kokusai Keiretsu, parent of the Hitachi Corporation, and owner of some of Japan's biggest banks. Another is Mitsui's OSK Line, Osaka Shosen Kabushiki. Their biggest shareholders include global giants Mitsubishi and Sumitomo. These corporations never were obliged to pay a penny to redeem the scrip they passed around or to compensate their slaves. All efforts to bring them to trial have been blocked by Tokyo or by Washington in a perverse collusion we examine later in this book. Many POWs who reached Japan were used as slaves by Nippon Steel or Mitsui Mines, working 10-hour days, 7 days a week. Malnutrition led to dysentery, jaundice, beriberi, scurvy, and pellagra. Guards beat them with pick handles or shovels. Few survived. Those who did bore scars inside and out. Frank Bigelow's experience was harrowing but typical. A 20-year-old seaman, second class from North Dakota. He was taken to Japan in a hell ship belonging to Mitsui and worked as a slave in a Mitsui coal mine. At 6'4", he weighed only 95 pounds, living on seaweed soup. He ate charcoal to stay alive. Excuse me. As he worked at coalface, um, As he worked at a coal face deep in the mine one night, a large rock fell on his leg and snapped the brittle bones. Excuse me. Got a little frog there in my throat. Okay, quote, there was another American POW, Dr. Thomas Hewlett, he recalled. He improvised with two sharpened bicycle spokes, one to my knee and one to my ankle. It didn't work. Eventually, I got gangrene. Since we had no medical supplies, much less surgical supplies, we had to do what was called a guillotine operation. He had a hacksaw blade and a razor blade, some knives, and four guys holding me. He resorted to a primitive method to battle the growing infection. He put maggots inside the bandage, and when he took them out and pulled out the infection, that man saved my life and my leg. The rest of my leg, I should say, end quote. When the war ended, Bigelow and other POWs were taken to Guam, where they were harangued and beaten by U.S. military intelligence officers and forced to sign papers promising not to tell anyone about their terrible experiences. Quote, we were told to read and sign and keep our mouths shut, Bigelow said. And I'm just putting that politely, end quote. For some reason, both Washington and Tokyo wanted total silence on the abuse of POWs. Wow, what an interesting sentence, huh? Both Tokyo and Washington wanted them silenced. Guilty by association, eh? Kind of makes you wonder what other nasty secrets Washington has. Okay. Just wondering out loud. All right. Worst of Japan's slave programs was that of the comfort women. Young girls, many not even 13 years old, were shanghaied into sexual slavery. After the war, Tokyo insisted all comfort women were merely prostitutes who volunteered, and that the entire operation was run by private enterprise. Both statements were demonstrably, oh, sorry about that. I moved the book. Let me see here. Okay, let me try that again. I'll try that paragraph again. Okay, worst of Japan's slave programs was that of the comfort women. Young girls, many not even 13 years old, were shanghaied into sexual slavery. After the war, Tokyo insisted all comfort women were merely prostitutes who volunteered, and that the entire operation was run by private enterprise. Both statements are demonstrably false. Beginning in 1904 in Korea, the Kampatae took full charge of organized prostitution for the Japanese armed forces. One reason was the possibility that military secrets might be passed along in bed, so its agents could ferry out careless soldiers or spies. This is just a side note, this is also known as honeypot. At first, the brothels were subcontracted. By 1932, the Kampatae resumed full control. A typical military brothel had 10 barracks, each divided into 10 rooms plus a supervisor's hut, all enclosed in barbed wire to keep the women inside. Rural brothels were tents, while railway cars were fitted out as mobile brothels. Korean and Japanese yakuza provided brutal security. Fees were based on a woman's ethnic origin. Japanese girls were top rated, followed by Koreans, Okinawans, Chinese, Southeast Asians. Later, Caucasian internees were added. Commissioned officers paid 3 yen, non-commissioned 2.5 yen, privates 2 yen. Bookkeeping was thorough, with forms for each woman listing daily earnings and number of clients. Up to 200,000 young women and adolescent girls were forced into this sexual slavery to serve more than 3.5 million Japanese soldiers. Each was expected to have 15 partners a day. Theoretically, they received 800 yen a month, minus cost of food, clothing, medical care, soap, and water. As many girls were illiterate, they were easily cheated. Most made zero and were destitute at the end of the war. Because of the extreme secrecy to this day surrounding Japan's treatment of POWs, civilian slaves, and comfort women, we are prevented from knowing important details. However, among files captured by Britain's Royal Marines in 1945 is a revealing document written by the commander of a camp for POWs at Haihoku in Taiwan. The commander had just received instructions dated August 1st, 1944, from the Chief of Staff, 11th Unit of Formosa, POW Security Number 10, Kampate. In any emergency, he is instructed to deal with his prisoners in the following way. Quote, whether they are destroyed individually or in groups, or however it is done, with mass bombing, poisonous smoke, drowning, decapitation, or what. It is the aim not to allow the escape of a single one, to annihilate them all and not to leave any traces. End quote. Wow. And that is the end of chapter 4. So let's read the endnotes for the rest of the chapter here. All right. So the note about hell ships. Ignatius Ding and the Global Alliance provided this new research on who really owned and operated the slave ships and hell ships. The note about Bigelow was a slave laborer in Mitsui coal mines. He told his story at the age of 78 at hearings of the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, chaired by Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah, on June 28th, 2000. The note about the Japanese government still denies involvement of the military in the comfort stations and in the recruitment of comfort women. You can find that in Hicks, The Comfort Women, page 142. The note about the Kampataye and comfort women in Korea, 1904, Manchuria, 1931. You can find that in Lamont Brown, Kampataye, page 44. Kampataye did the recruiting. Hicks, The Comfort Women, page 21. Kampataye sold licenses for brothels. You can find that in Hicks, page 2. Kampataye directly controlled comfort stations in Shanghai from 1932 on. See Hicks, page 19. Physical description of a comfort station. You can find that in Hicks, page 20. United Nations report on the mission to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the Republic of Korea and Japan on the issue of military sexual slavery for January 1996, online at the UN website. Yakuza maintains security at comfort stations. Hicks, page 47. Ethnic preferences and the fees, Hicks, page 22. Records for each woman's performance, Hicks, page 59. 200,000 women forced into sexual slavery. You can find that in Margaret Scott, Making the Rising Sun Blush. Far Eastern Economic Review, page March 30th, 1995, page 50. 15 partners a day, see Hicks, page 32. Comfort women's theoretical slavery of 800 yen a month. See Hicks, page 63 and 64. In 1994, denying that any involvement by military or civilian officials in sex slavery racket, the Japanese government encouraged private citizens to set up a fund to compensate these women. Very few have accepted this money because it is just another dodge of responsibility by the government of Japan. And the note about not to allow the escape of a single one, to annihilate them all and not to leave any trace. You can find that in Exhibit Q, which is letter number 17. Document number 2701 Affidavit of JTN, cross reproduced in Mackay, betrayal in high places. Wow, pretty interesting. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 4. What an interesting chapter. Very brutal times that they lived in. Oh, sorry about that. Okay. I hope you enjoyed that. Uh, very sad era. Okay, so we will thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time in our next reading. Okay, bye-bye now.